When exactly did the Middle Ages start? What at first appears to be a quite simple question, we shall see during the course of this video, requires a quite complicated answer. Let us then find out when antiquity ended and when the Middle Ages began. I still clearly remember how in school the whole period from late antiquity was skipped, and after dealing with the Roman Empire, the next chapter in the book was called the Middle Ages. One introductory sentence said something in the meaning of, after the Roman Empire fell, barbarians settled on the former territory of the Roman Empire and they established their domains, and so did antiquity end and the Middle Ages started in Europe. I was really unsatisfied with that sentence, but of course, school being school, I never got a satisfactory answer. So my thirst for knowledge about late antiquity and the transitioning period from the old world to what we now call the Middle Ages had started. And it turned out to be an extremely interesting and complicated topic. In 400 AD, we can probably all agree the Roman Empire was still intact, and this epoch can still be firmly counted to antiquity. It was now already late antiquity, a period which some scholars date starting in the 4th century with the rise of Christianity. But even as late as AD 400, the old classical structures of antiquity were well and intact. Yes, the pagan temples were closed since 395, but that was only enforced in the big cities, and especially in the countryside pagan traditions continued. Classical architecture was still being built in parts, and many monumental buildings were still being built, especially in the Eastern Roman Empire. The earliest region that would experience the start of what we can call Middle Ages was Britannia. When the usurper Constantine III left the island together with all Roman troops, Britannia was left completely to itself. Living standards sharply dropped after the Romans left, and the old Roman cities would start decaying fast. Technology declined sharply together with living standards, and already by 500 AD, basic technologies and items were completely missing. Building with brick and mortar was lost, as well as elaborate amphorae, together with elaborate textiles or tablewares, as well as glass and other technologies that were quite common during the Roman Empire. The drop was sharp and profound, as archaeological evidence supports. But while Britain had been plunged into utter darkness, where only small enclaves of old Roman fortifications were left, protected by the remnants of Roman soldiers and their descendants, like beacons of light amidst the growing darkness, other parts of the former Western Roman Empire were still doing very well. The Ostrogothic and Visigothic kingdoms continued Roman customs and traditions, and especially the Ostrogothic kingdom of Theodoric can in many forms be seen as a continuation of the Roman Empire. Archaeological evidence shows that this region continued virtually unchanged after the rule of Roman emperors had ended in the West. It was only with the disaster that the Gothic Wars initiated that the old classical structures of Roman antiquity were brutally ended in Italy. This took place between 535 and 562. These 27 years saw Italy be thrown into utter chaos and darkness. Cities were laid to waste and started decaying. All Roman institutions had vanished. Roman literature and law vanished almost completely. Roman civic life had been ended. The Church survived as the only institution from the 4th century of Imperial Rome, and it was now more and more the popes who would govern the city of Rome and exert more power. Thus, we can say that the Middle Ages started in Italy some 150 years after they did in Britannia. But in the East, the Roman Empire was still alive and well. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating topic of the fall of the Roman Empire. And please consider supporting our work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. And of course, I would like to thank all our patrons who support this channel. And we have a new Sol Invictus supporter, Antonio Brandao. Thank you so much, Antonio, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. And of course, I would also like to thank all the people who donated to this channel via PayPal, such as the very generous Wyatt Rötzisender, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Jonathan White, DJ Privat, and Sterling Simmons. Thank you to everyone who supported this channel. I cannot thank you enough because this channel really depends on your support. Gratias agutibi, amici. Yet even here, the first signs of the coming Middle Ages were already showing. Justinian not only destroyed everything that was left of the Western Roman Empire, but he defunded the Neoplatonic Academy of Athens. This old institution dated back all the way to its foundation by Plato himself in 387 BC. In the early 400s AD then, the academy was revived as a Neoplatonic school. It was then in 529 that Justinian defunded this 1,000-year-old institution of knowledge and learning, and paganism was again persecuted in the empire of Justinian, as had been so often the case since Constantius II almost 200 years earlier. Many of the Neoplatonists fled to the east and were granted asylum at the court of the Sassanid king Khosrau in the Persian capital Ctesiphon. They took many old scrolls of literature and philosophy and even science with them. It is thought that the descendants of these Neoplatonists were responsible for the Arabic revival of Neoplatonism in Baghdad in the 9th century, when Baghdad had established itself as a new center of learning in the East. But Justinian had many other pagans persecuted and effectively forbade them of holding any state office. But as if that was not enough, Justinian ordered a persecution of surviving Hellenes, accompanied by the burning of pagan books, pictures, and statues. Most pagan literature was on papyrus, and so it perished before being able to be copied onto something more durable. It is difficult to assess the degree to which Christians were responsible for the losses of ancient documents in many cases, but in the mid-6th century, active persecution in Constantinople destroyed many ancient texts, and so invaluable knowledge of antiquity was lost. This was already a big step towards the Middle Ages. But it was completed when large parts of the Eastern Roman Empire were overrun by Avars and Bulgars from the north, overrunning almost the entire Balkans, and the loss of Egypt and the Levant to the Arabs in the mid-7th century led to a collapse of the Eastern Roman trade network. Constantinople, the once mighty city, began shrinking massively, and had the city had 600,000 inhabitants in 500 AD, that number was by 700 AD as low as between 100 and 200,000. It is thus that the Dark Ages had now arrived in the Eastern Roman Empire after about AD 650, although some cities such as Constantinople still retained a lot of the old classical appearance and institutions. But Carthage only fell as late as 698 to the Arabs and was then razed to the ground, taking with it 850 years of Roman history and architecture, the old amphitheaters, and many of the old temples that still had been standing. We can thus say that the Middle Ages did not start uniformly everywhere, but it was a 250-year-long process of transformation, starting with the abandonment of Britannia and then slowly spreading southwards and eastwards. By the mid-6th century, the Middle Ages had arrived in Italy, 100 years later in the Balkans, and by 700 the last classical Greco-Roman strongholds had been converted or had fallen. Pagans still continued their ancient rites, some as late as the 9th century, but the old Greco-Roman antiquity had by 700 largely come to an end. And thus had the Middle Ages begun in all parts of Europe. And if you are interested in why Britannia was abandoned, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in what the fall meant for the city of Rome, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias amici imperii Romani, and bene valete.